Yes, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for this launch of the State of Global Air Quality Funding, launch of the report and ongoing expert discussion. Before I begin, and I will introduce what we're doing today, and also introduce myself as well. Just to let those of you who are online, thank you for joining us first of all. But if you'd like to listen in French, there is translation available, and you can also listen in Arabic. However, if you do not have Arabic function at the moment, you need to use Portuguese. So that's the Portuguese to listen in Arabic. So without much ado, thank you very much again for joining us. My name is Sandra Ryder. I'm the CEO of Merlin Reimagined, which is an African-led international development consultancy in Beijing and also offices in Nairobi and London. We have a fantastic lineup today for the launch of this report. And again, thank you to all the guests who are joining us here online and also in person. We are here at the annual meetings, the IMF and World Bank annual meetings, the first time they've been held on the African continent for 50 years, since they were held in Kenya, in Nairobi, where I was born as well. Here in Marrakesh, I'll just start off by letting us know what the air quality is outside, since we're talking about air quality. Here in Marrakesh, it is 38. Interestingly enough, Nairobi today has the worst air quality in comparison to Marrakesh. Beijing is 46, Nairobi 57, but even worse than that is London, which is 72. So generally, these are all quite good numbers, but at the same time, there are many cities across the world in which air quality is declining and has the prospect of declining even further. So the question is for us today, what can we, governments, partner countries, multilaterals, the private sector and non-governmental organizations, civil society do to make sure that, for instance, here in Marrakesh, the Victoria North is still visible every day, and that people are also not suffering from air quality impacts. That is our question for today. Before we begin that discussion, let me first, however, introduce you to Sean Maguire, not the actor, but still very important, the Head of Strategic Partnerships and Communications Director at the Air Fund. He is the person to present on this. He has been policy advocacy and campaign communication for a range of organizations, not just CAF, but also the PARC, ICRC, and UK government. He started his career in journalism. So I'm sure he will hit his heart with exactly the right kind of headline that we need to know about the state of global air quality funding. So, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and know you'll contain your disappointment that I'm not the actor. Back in the days when people had landlines, they didn't usually get phone calls from people who thought they were going to be speaking to the actor. My name is Tom Maguire. I'm very pleased to be here. I want to walk you through our State of Global Air Quality Funding Report for 2023. This is an annual report, and initially when we conceived this, we wanted to just point out who the funding what environment and not. It's now become a very important way of tracking international finance assistance for cleaning up the air. So we've been improving the methodology each year, and this is the 5th annual edition. And we partner with CPI, a great partner who dig into the data out there and find out who is funding. But why do we do it? What's the justification? Why are we making the argument that air quality demands more? Well, you can see up here on this checkerboard, there's an array of statistics. We all know that statistics can be a bit numbing because the numbers are so large. It's hard to relate them back to individuals and to the personal economic and human costs that's input by. But I think it's important nonetheless to not to ignore the huge toll that this phenomenon inflicts on us all. And we are all affected by air pollution. As Hannah said, most of the world's cities have air pollution that is far too high for their population. And in some parts of the world, urban air quality is absolutely dire. Really under. And this is all the more regretted when you consider that poor air quality impacts the vulnerable. Children, the elderly, the registered, and the poor. And you know that's the human toll of lifelong illness and early death. And there's of course the huge amount of burden that air pollution imposes as well. Health costs, lower quality and it all adds up to a really compelling case for. So that importance is not borne out by the figures on front. There is actually very little fun. Just $17.3 billion over 6 years. And that amounts to less than 1% of all international development funding over that period for direct air quality. And this is the money where international development funders have lent or given to other countries to help them specifically to improve their air. So it goes on very specifically targeted to outdoor air quality. And you can see there's some difference year by year, with a bit of a slump in the whole year. But essentially, we're just bumping along in the grand scheme. So what was the money spent on? Well, most of it went on transport projects and then multi-sector air pollution control programs. Now, they might not have a very sexy title, but we love multi-sector air pollution control programs. And why do we love them? Because essentially that's where a city or a country has decided it has a serious air pollution problem and it wants to get it. So it goes to a funder and it borrows to invest to understand where the air pollution has come from, and it puts air pollution monitoring in place, and it develops regulations and policy to tackle the underlying sources. So the dirty factories, the old vehicles, the coal-fired household heating, the waste burning, etc., etc. So there have been some very big projects like this that have made considerable strides in reducing air pollution in some regions. One other point just to make on this slide, you'll see that alarmingly, it's hard to see because they're very small, but you'll see that alarmingly very little money is being lent or given for monitoring and modeling projects. Now, these are the sort of kind of 101 of air pollution reduction. But without knowing where your air pollution is, where it's coming from, it's very hard to have a serious plan to combat it. So it's a little alarming that so little money goes into that area. So this is the other category. This is an important category because we want to try to give the whole picture here of what money is being spent. This is money that goes to projects that mention improved air quality as a side benefit. These are projects that are not primarily devised to improve air quality. It could be clean energy or transport electrification or waste management. And they're done for good intrinsic reasons, and they offer enormous development benefits. And they offer air quality benefits as well. And what we do is we track such projects. So they say, we want to ease congestion with an electrification project for the railways here, and it will also benefit air quality. So we track that. And $101 billion was spent over this period on this. So it's much more than the strictly defined category, and that's great, but it's still not enough. It's only 4% of the total. And looked at another way, what this essentially means is that 96% of the funding isn't designed to secure air quality co-benefits, which seems like a very large missed opportunity in terms of that intentionality to get the health, social, and economic benefits that you get when you start to think about air quality properly. So now it's time to see who spent the money. So this is the ranking for the first category, for development actors funding air quality projects. And you can see top of the list, Japan, next Asian Development Bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Canada, Republic of Korea, World Bank Group, thank you very much. Note the regional map, very much focused on Asia. It's clustering. And also note that there isn't much of a tail. The top 10 are basically the whole, representing 97% of the total. So we really need to increase the number of countries and agencies that are funding this work. And it's indicative that not all countries and agencies see this as a problem. And this is the ranking for development access funding projects with AQ co-benefits. That's the second broader category that I mentioned before. It's quite similar, though there's a bit less of a regional clustering. Again, though, it's quite concentrated on the top actors. Beyond the top 10, you quickly get to small and negligible amounts of money, and then you tail off to nothing. Now, who received the money? Looking the right way up, there we go. Who received the money? You'll see that 86% of the money went to just 5 countries in Asia. And more than a third of the funding went just to China. Now, China is a huge country. It has huge air pollution problems, but it is a very concentrated funding application. And again, the regional concentration is very pronounced. Asia, of course, has huge air pollution problems, and it's great that action is taking place there. But what does this mean for the rest of the world? And I would say it means the rest of the world is neglected. So Africa gets just 5%, and Latin America just 1%. That's a real issue in particular for Africa, where some of the world's largest megacities are emerging, with huge poverty, congestion, and air quality problems. So there's a real risk that Africa is going to go down the same fossil fuel intensive development path that China and India went down, with all the attendant health and economic problems that has caused. So unless we act now, the already severe air pollution problems in places like Lagos, Kinshasa, and Cairo, and other cities in Africa are going to get much worse. And I know the World Bank is lending or has lent to Lagos, Cairo for action on air pollution, and I'm sure we'll hear some more on that later. So there is another problem with the way that money is being done. As you see, it's essentially tailored towards middle-income countries, which can absorb more debt. Very little of it is in the form of grants. And that's particularly relevant for the Africa situation, where so many countries are already debt stressed. Now, we're not so naive, I'm not so naive to think that there's billions and billions of dollars of development funding just waiting to be given away. But the figures do suggest that the packages and the mix of loans and development funding aren't persuading finance ministries sufficiently in poorer countries. So while the health and the environment ministry might say action on air quality is a priority, the finance ministry is saying it isn't, and it isn't affordable. Which begs the question, how can we increase demand from countries for investment on cleaner air? And how can we make the finance packages more attractive? What's the answer besides increasing funding overall? Well, one possible answer, which we've researched a bit in this report, is to put together smarter finance packages that can entice more capital from different sources, including the private sector. Our survey suggests that there hasn't been sufficient use of diverse financial instruments to pull more funding towards the air quality issue. There could be more de-risking of projects through guarantees and currency hedging to make them more attractive to private investors. Air quality benefits and objectives could be better and more exclusively integrated into the design of new green, social, and sustainability bond programs. Results-based financing has been used in China in particular, and that's a model that we think could be taken further. And blended and structured finance are also mechanisms that appear to be underutilized. So what are the key takeaways for you today? Well, they are: 1, there's not enough money being spent. 2, the money is not getting everywhere that it's needed. 3, and this is a bit more positive, there are signs development funders can change their behavior. because there's evidence that they are stopping new fossil fuel funding. You'll see in the small print at the bottom there that in 2021, more money was spent on, for the first year, more money was spent on air pollution projects than was spent on fossil fuel belonging projects. And that was in the wake of the advocacy and action that took place around the G20, G7, and COP26 to pressure the development actors to no longer fund fossil fuel projects. So can they change their behavior on air quality as well? And specifically, how would we like development funders to change? So it's a bit of a detailed list, but you can see where it goes from substantially increasing air quality funding commitments to working with governments to stimulate demand for air quality funding to increasing grant concession. And we believe, taken together, if we can make progress in these areas, we'll be taking considerable steps towards the cleaner air we all need. So thank you very much. Now I'm back to Helen.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you very much for that. So now we're going to move to the section where we're going to have a discussion about these important results. Those three key facts that we should be remembering, but we will discuss why they are there, but also more importantly, the solution. So I'm going to introduce panelists now. Let me have my seat as moderator. So first, Sean, would you like to join us? This will be also, I'm going to begin first with ladies first. Valerie Hickey, please join us. She is the Global Director for Environment, Natural Resources, Blue Economy at the World Bank. She has been at the World Bank in various positions, including in the climate group as well. So I think you'll be very useful in terms of helping us understand also what are the linkages between climate and air quality and also other diversity. And you've been working in conservation for over 25 years. So thank you very much for joining us today. The next lady on our panel is Sonia Dunlop. Sonia is the program lead for public banks and multilateral development banks at E3G. If you don't know E3G, it is a climate-focused think tank based in the UK. And she's been working on climate policy and air quality and renewable policy in the EU, UK government as well, and also worked previously in the solar PV industry as well. So you know the practicalities and the policy side. So again, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for what you'll bring to our discussion. And last but not least, Gregor Baxter, who's the General Manager of Gulf International Bank in New York. Which, for those of you who don't know, Gulf International Bank, it was established in 1975. It's regulated by the Central Bank of Bahrain. And Gregor himself has been working in this industry for 40 years, not just at GIB, but at GIB you have led a number of very complex financial ventures and structures. So again, you'll be helping us to really bring in the private sector angle, but also the finance from the private sector angle as well into the discussion. So thank you again for joining us. So I'm going to take the prerogative as the moderator to ask a few questions of our esteemed panelists, and then we will open up for audience questions as well thereafter. But let's kick off the discussion initially. First question to you, Valerie, I think. The World Bank has obviously got a new president, Ajay Banga, and clean air has been mentioned. He said that it's one of your priorities. At the same time, in terms of the document, for example, the evolution roadmap, we noticed that there was a clean air in there just once, I think. Is it a priority? From inside of the World Bank, you're sixth on the table of international funders of air quality. How has that happened? But also, could there be more that you could do in the future?
Thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you for organizing this discussion, because it's not just that we have a new president, we have a new mission and vision of the bank, which is to end poverty on a livable planet. And we know at the bank that we can't have a world without poverty in a world without feeding. And so we're very, very focused on this. But this is where, and I would disagree with Sean, one point he made is that we have to divorce deciding on whether something is a priority from how much money is spent on it. Because we may be number 6 in the list, doesn't mean this isn't a priority, it just means this is different. Because we all know what has to be done. We know there has to be better regulation that is credible, that clearly introduces sticks and carrots. We know there have to be credible institutions who can implement that regulation, who have the particularly digital infrastructure to understand what's going on in air pollution. And then we know there have to be sectoral abatement, not just in fossil fuels. In agriculture, example, the terrible air pollution in a city like Delhi comes from agricultural burning, not from fossil fuels. So we know what has to be done. The challenge is we need money to do it. And there are 2 reasons why this money is difficult to mobilize. And when I talk about money, I'm not just talking about multilateral development money. Because at the end of the day, money from the World Bank, for example, exists to facilitate, to cajole, to attract domestic public resources and private capital. We are not a substitute for either. We are an enabler of both. And I think that's important. The 2 reasons it's been difficult, the first have to do with data. So one of the, I think, challenges we have in this space is we've been very good at making the economic argument for why air pollution matters, and it absolutely matters. Places like South Asia, people are living 5 years less than they otherwise would. And for a lot of their lives, it is a worse and miserable life because they're getting cancers. They're getting asthma because they've got sick kids that have to take care of. So we know it's bad. We know the economic costs, the 6.1% of global GDP. We know these numbers. The problem is, if you're a minister of finance, you can't monetize avoided costs. So simply making the argument based on economic costs is not enough. When that same minister of finance, she's hearing about the economic costs of everything else. Of people in her country going hungry, of kids with lead poisoning, of the impacts of floods and droughts from climate change. So we have to move away from data that is simply based on economic costs and talk about the potential financial benefits, financial, not just economic benefits. So we have to change how we think about making the argument. The second problem with data is we have a lot of global data. We don't have enough local data. And without the local data, understanding not just that the air quality is 38 today in Marrakesh, but what does that mean exactly? And where in Marrakesh? Because there are parts of this city that are much worse than 38 and other parts that are better than 30. So we need to have better infrastructure to help local decision makers understand where the pollution is. And we need source apportionment, which is of course enhanced waves and what's called this. Because we've seen mistakes made where governments end up funding the closure of industry, for example, because they assume the smoke they're seeing coming out of smokestacks is the cause of air pollution, when in fact it wasn't the primary cause. And for governments who 60% of low-income governments in debt distress, a third of countries kicked out of the capital markets since COVID, access to money is already hard enough. The money that's available is already expensive enough. It can't be wasted. So we need to help governments understand where the air pollution is coming from so their actions are targeted and are most effective. So that's one of the reasons data that it's been difficult to mobilize the funding. The second reason has to do with the fact that often when it comes to air pollution, where you need to spend the money is not where the externalities of air pollution is happening. Take the Western Balkans, for example. 40% of the air pollution in most of the cities in the Western Balkans is caused by actions in another country. So can you ask country X to borrow money from an MDB to solve a problem in country Y? It's a difficult ask. And that's why the idea of air pollution co-benefits matter as much as direct financing for air pollution. And so that's why at the World Bank, we're really thinking through how can we use our money better? And we have a large portfolio. We're experimenting with everything from payments for result programs in places like China to direct investments in places like Europe. We know it can work. And this is something about air pollution that is a little bit different than climate change, for example, or the loss of biodiversity. You can see changes in the short term. Look at places in the US like Los Angeles, New York, where air pollution was awful in the 1990s. Within a decade, it was cleaned up. Mexico City, same thing. Beijing, it's a huge change in air pollution in less than 10 years. So we know it can change. But we need to figure out how do we help countries with our financing, for example, to repurpose those perverse subsidies that are causing them to invest in fossil fuels, are causing them to invest in diesel generators, which is one of the biggest causes of the air pollution in places like Wales. How do we help repurpose subsidies so that you end up with the government being able to spend money to combat air pollution, but it's not additional money, it's money that they had spent causing air pollution. And then how do we help to de-risk investments for the private sector so they get involved in the new technologies and the new industries that end up creating the same economic value for a country without the externality? And that's the role the MDPs need to take, rather than simply being used as a substitute to try and deal with the problem directly. Because that's a short-term fix. And if there's one thing we've learned in the past 2 decades, and particularly with today, still the results of COVID, climate change, and conflict, is that we can't, as an MDB, as the World Bank, simply finance green projects. It's a short-term fix. We have to invest in green and resilient economies. And that means we have to invest in what countries spend their own money better and to attract private sector investment.
Thank you, Valerie. So if I can sum up, it feels like you're in a stage at which there's a mission, still a lot of questions, and also part of the challenge is even on the recipient side, as well as the kind of, is the money forthcoming, full stop. So we're gonna keep coming back to this question. And I want to put that to you as well, Sonia. What is this, a demand or a supply issue? And in terms of, especially in terms of experience from the other MDBs, and also and even kind of the climate funds as well, Green Climate Fund has just had a replenishment. Do you think that will mean there's going to be more finance for air quality or not? Is that extra supply in some way potentially going to solve the issue? Is it going to increase the fund? You've got this one.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Yes, no, it's such a good question. Is it demand? Is this a demand problem or a supply problem?
Maybe it's both.
Or is it, is it that the shareholders from both the donor and recipient countries need to make this a real priority and join the dots across all the different sectors of lending to make the most of the finance that's already going out the door? I feel like it's something, the solution is definitely there. So first of all, I'm delighted to be here. I actually started my career 15 years ago working on air pollution in London at the time. And then bought my first flat by looking at the air pollution map very, very carefully. And then once went to Beijing and had an argument with the taxi driver in Beijing because I rolled up the windows, switched on my little portable filter, and he started complaining about the noise. So that was a funny moment.
Be very different now. Things have changed significantly, as Valerie said.
Yes, true, they really have. But my name is Sonia Dunlop. I'm a program lead at E3G, which stands for Third Generation Environmentalism, where I lead a program on climate change and the multilateral development banks and all public development banks around the world. And we are a climate change policy think tank with over 150 people across 4 countries, DC, Berlin, Brussels, and London, and many other countries around the world. Working on all different aspects of climate change policy. And we have a team of about 20 people analysing and thinking about how all public banks around the world and all multilateral development banks can really view transition to climate safety. And one of the things we do is we have a website, a tracking website, where we monitor how the multilateral development banks are really mainstreaming climate, every aspect of climate into all their operations. And we also now look at the bilateral development finance institutions, like the Exploration Agency, or Germany's KfW, or France's AFD, or China Development. And China Development Bank, I think, is critical, by one of the biggest public financial institutions in the world. And we do a lot of work around that, and a lot of support for a number of shareholder governments organizing convenings and like-minded groups on different issues. And I think there is real potential to think about how the air quality and air pollution issue cuts across so much of our work, and how we really need to help join the dots. So we do a lot of work trying to encourage the multilateral development banks to pay that full financing to fossil fuels. And indeed, it was mentioned in the briefing, the 35 countries agreed to pay out all international public finance to fossil fuels at COP26 Glasgow. And we were behind, we were very much behind that statement at Glasgow. But one of the things that I think is really important is to think about how we can not just look at the phase out of fossil fuel financing across the MDBs, but look at also how the MDBs and DFIs can be looking at retiring existing coal plants and existing gas plants as well, in coal retirement mechanisms such as the Climate Investment Fund Accelerated Coal Transition Program, such as the Nation Development Bank's energy transition mechanism, and such as the Just Energy Transition Partnerships as well. Because I think that's a key part of the solution. We're also very much trying to think about how distributed renewables and distributed solar and wind and mini grids can help this, and often displace diesel generation that can be an important factor to air pollution problems, as well as think about how we can ensure that both multilateral development banks and bilateral development finance institutions are applying rigorous standards in the projects that they the infrastructure projects they finance. So, for example, I think for a long time, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the newest Asian MDB, was very much saying, well, where there is existing air quality legislation in place in countries such as India, we will use those standards instead of applying any other international WHO standards. And that meant that the projects they were doing in India actually, in terms of air quality, being done to a much lower standard than say the projects that were doing in Myanmar. There wasn't natural legislation they were applying. So there's interesting interplay there between national and global standards. But we're very keen to help. We're very keen to understand the synergies between climate mainstreaming and air quality mainstreaming across. We do now because all the different sectors of lending that the MDB includes, the water, urban and cities, energy, transport, and so on. And we go through these with a fine-tooth comb and try and pick out what the best practices in terms of mainstreaming, how to bring alignment, climate, and all of that into these strategies. And we think the same could be done here on air quality, and actually we're building on the analysis that was presented with the report, which is really striking. I mean, 1% of under on specifically for air quality is just not enough, given the absolute urgency of this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. So again, if I can sum up, I think it sounds like what you're saying is that posts really need to be made at the country level, and that has been done in some cases, and I think it correlates very well with what Sean was saying earlier, especially the concentration in Asia. That case has been made very well, and there's also this kind of displacement between fossil fuels, which would also help, but there's still a lot more to do, and still And I wanted to bring you in here as well, Greg, because this is obviously, Sean talks about the economic case. You spend $1, you get $30 out. It sounds like a good economic case, and it should be a case that is obviously very attractive to the private sector if it's put in that way. What's your experience of that? Is it easy to get private finance into air quality funding? And again, is that because of demand or supply? What's your view?
So thank you. Next one, thank you. Let's put it into context, and it's good news. So the first thing about the private sector is the money there. All too often hear about looking for new money. The private sector assets around the world are about bank assets are about $183 billion. Assets under management will be $181 trillion of private sector capital out there. So it's how do we repurpose connect that capital towards topics such as sustainability in general? The good news is it's happening in the private sector. The sustainable debt issuance in 2021 was 1.8 trillion. The amount in 2022 was 1.5 trillion. Hence up supply to COVID. But these are strongly up in previous years. And so how do we do more of this? You think about it on the lending side of the private sector. It's about three things. It's about keeping it simple, making it familiar, and not appealing to the private sector's sense of altruism, but appealing to the private sector's wallet. That's what's important. $30 out. $30 out doesn't come back to the investor, of course. We wish that it would. How do we keep it simple, and how do we make it simple? So it's best by way of example. Anybody who's been to Hanoi, Bangkok, here from my hotel Marrakesh this morning, is familiar with lots of new buildings. Commercial real estate investment, commercial real estate planning, these are very, very, very familiar topics. Investors in private sector. There's about roughly one city the size of New York being built to the building stock every year. That's going to continue for the next 40 years. So these tall, shiny buildings, a lot of times on the ground floor of these buildings, health clinics, where women drive their kids to go see an expert in things like asthma. But guess what? There isn't a parking. So they drive around in circles around these new fancy buildings, and there's no place to park, making the air quality worse, while they're trying to get their kid to see a doctor to treat the very condition that's been caused by the very fact that they're driving around circles and the building up in their parking lot. If you're a lender, lends to a developer who's put a parking lot on the ground floor of the building. That makes a very good loan, because if you do that, more people will go to that building. Recently, it's be better than the majority. The value of your loan will be better. The turnover of tenants will be lower. All good things. The same is true, obviously, for investors at the same time. They are investing in that, but if they can get the better financial from doing so. I'm driving past the development very comfortable. One of the things that we need to do is change the way we drive, the way we transport. So electric vehicles are an important part of the equation. One of the challenges in electric vehicles, of course, is range anxiety. So if you're developing a shopping mall, recognize that nobody wants to go and get that car charged by sitting at a gas station. The reason you bought an electric vehicle in the first place is not to go to a gas station. So why do we make people go to a gas station to charge their car? Breathe in the fumes around a gas station. If you're developing a shopping mall, make one whole level of your park for EV cars with charging stations in it. Guess what? More people will come to the mall. More people in the mall, it's a pleasant experience for people to come. They associate good things with doing that. And so by keeping it simple and making it familiar, it's very attractive. Valerie said a lot of the stuff is difficult. If we start to build the momentum, then we can start to deal with the difficult stuff. The difficult stuff like carbon capture and sequestration is really, really hard to do. Building green hydrogen plants is really, really hard to do. They take a long time to do. Bankers don't want to wait a long time. Right? They need a credit committee meeting a week on Tuesday. They don't want to wait to present another feasibility study a week on Tuesday. They want to get on with it. Then finally, I think the other thing from a growth point of view is how do we get money to hard places to get money to? And there I think that the voluntary carbon market is very really important. For banks to be able to buy high quality carbon credits to mitigate and offset their own carbon footprint, that money a lot of time goes to eliminating manufacturing charcoal, cooking with charcoal and so on. And in the voluntary carbon market, we see roughly $2 billion of transactions, up $1 billion shares. It's on a very rapid trend. It's net good positive news with second.
Thanks, Gregor. And I think, again, that's quite an interesting message in the sense of what you're saying is integrate air quality into design, integrate it into what is already being done in a sense of kind of a resilience. It's part of that resilience equation, isn't it? Of what countries are already doing and what they're planning to do. And I think that's also interesting. We had some preparation discussions online and also in person in Nairobi as part of the preparation for this launch. And one of the messages that was coming through from, especially in Nairobi, was, how do you, at the country level, even at the city level, how do you prioritize air quality as you're dealing with these issues? And I wanted to bring that back to you, Sean, as well, because, this is it a question of, I think Valerie was quite clear, you don't think it is an issue of prioritization necessarily in terms of recipients, because it can, and I think Rebecca's message was that too, it can be done as you're working on these things. But let's interrogate that a bit more. If you're having to deal with a range of issues in terms of pollution, other types of pollution, waste, etc., from at the city level, at the country level, is this something that really resonates with your citizens? And are many countries, for example, if not enough funding is going to the African continent, are African citizens going to end up going the same route as Beijing did, which was, I was in Beijing when the pollution was really, really difficult. I had to make sure my son, who was, a year old at the time, had to wear masks and so on all the time. He was tiny. But now it's a completely different issue. The government and obviously international funders have really supported that transition. Is that what we're going to be seeing? If funding doesn't get to the African continent, for instance, is this what we're going to see? Is this what countries are going to have to deal with later?
Thanks. I think it's, just because we're here in Marrakesh and it's the World Bank annual meetings and because Valerie's on the panel is, it's not just about the World Bank. I mean, much as we are keen to encourage the bank to spend more and to have a leadership role as a sort of amongst that community. I do think there are also actions for other development actors. We've seen regional funders take the lead in Asia. We're not seeing regional funders take the lead on this issue in other parts of the world, which is unfortunate. We've also seen relatively little action by standard development actors, bilateral actors. We see some projects by some good projects by USAID, but they're small beer compared to the size of the problem. And there isn't a development agency out there who has gripped this and said this really is an issue that combines our concerns of climate, combines our concerns with health, and said we're going to make this an issue and we're going to try and drive it. And I think this is, that lack of leadership and initiative on this issue is particularly telling in Africa. Another point, we are seeing some fantastic action at the city level across the world on air pollution. That's where a lot of the leadership is. Because that's where the issue is felt most viscerally by communities and by citizens. And they're calling on their city leaders, do something about this, take action on this. So, you know, we work with 40 cities, we fund them, and they've helped, that's helped set up a network of cities where the cities can commit to climate action and air pollution action as part of that. So there is a road for action through the city door. I don't quite know what all my rules are on lending to subnational entities, but there is kind of an avenue for action there. And I think there's a bit of a playbook developing on how you can get action at the city level through. You need better data. You need to understand where the air pollution is and where it's coming from. And with that evidence, then you can build a system. And with that, then you can embolden the authorities to take action, because there are vested interests that need to be overcome. You know, there will be the kind of the union of including taxi drivers in the DX who will be resistant to change, and then you need kind of sort of subsidy program to help them wean them off their polluting vehicles onto cleaner vehicles. So that costs money, and that's kind of easier to do in for countries like London than it is in the developed world. But I do think there is there's still a lot of work to do on project design to try to find ways to build that incentive for the private sector through building codes, for instance, through urban design, better planning, through lending that promises a return on investment on infrastructure spend. All of these things which, you know, are just not flowing sufficiently down to the city with the kind of the innovation and the energy to see fast action. So I think what I've probably done is I've probably posed a couple of questions to Valerie there, but I don't know whether you want to pick up on that in particular, the question around city action.
They're all good questions, but I want to go back to something and I will get to it, John, but something you said, Hannah, about the supply and demand issue. And this is where we need to be kind, particularly to the ministers of finance across Africa and among all the least developed countries globally. One of the reasons we've seen so much action in those 5 countries in East Asia is because they are middle-income countries, because they have the luxury to be able to make choices that other countries don't. I mean, if you look at a country like Kenya, for example, it has huge air quality issues in Nairobi. It also has people starving to death in the north of the country because we're near 3 of the drought in the Horn of Africa. It has huge refugee camps. It has a need to provide jobs for young people. As Minister of Finance with limited revenue mobilization, with debt complexity, you make those choices. So I do think we need to prepare when we talk about prioritizing air pollution. It's absolutely critical. It is killing more people every year than COVID has. But people, ministers of finance, countries are not taking action because they don't care. The World Bank isn't prioritizing lending in this space because we don't care. It's because we live in a world where there are enormous demands for a very limited pot of international money. And there are enormous demands for a very limited pot of domestic public budget. And that's why I think it is key to begin to design policy structures that encourage gains in air pollution through other means. What Gregor was talking about. How do we figure out how to incentivize construction that includes car parks? Or that thinks about building codes that reduce air pollution, or industrial construction that make sure you have to have air scrubbers in your smokestacks. So policy matters, and figuring out how to make policy both the carrot and the stick to reduce air pollution in the end. And that's why repurposing subsidies becomes so key, because that's a huge source of money. Every year, countries directly spend $1.5 trillion in repurposing. If you add on the economic costs, including air pollution, that adds another $6 trillion every year. If subsidies were a country, they'd have a seat at the keep that. It's that big an amount of money. And that's money that we need to help countries use better. So that they can get all of the development gains they need without spending additional money that they don't. And action at city level is absolutely key. But again, we have to remember that cities often don't have the jurisdiction over the things that cause the erosion. So while it's key that cities have the data and particularly the digital infrastructure to understand, as you said, from where the pollution is coming from, where it is worse, because that's important for citizens to be able to take those actions, kind of like you said, do I need to mask my kid this morning? Do I maybe need to keep my kid out of school this morning because just getting them to school is dangerous? But often the causes of pollution are in the agricultural sector, in the industrial sector, even the transport sector, which not all cities have control over who gets to come into their country. And even cities like London, we also what happened with the congestion crisis. Because again, we have to think through what solutions are available and what are affordable. And when it comes to air pollution solutions that are available and affordable, that's different in different cities and different countries. And again, it's why thinking about embedding a limitation on those externalities within policy becomes key, because that way you're not talking about ex post actions to do something up. You're talking about ensuring it doesn't happen in the first place.
Thank you so much. I see, Sonia, you want to come in, and I like the, you know, it's good that we're having this brief discussion between us, and also just a reminder for the audience as well, we will be on.
I wanted just to mention, and then the point that Hilary, you made at the start about the fact that you can't monetize these avoided costs. I think this is the fundamental problem that we have with these projects. You mentioned a benefit ratio of 1 to 30. It's not financial, it's economic. You can't make $30 out of it. And it's the same problem we have with adaptation. You can't do these projects because nobody is willing to pay for them. And if you can generate revenue, then the private sector can't access the debt from the bonds. So we need to put in place mechanisms to pay the private sector to develop these benefits, these co-benefits, and deliver them. Sorry, two more quick points then. We have the adaptation benefits mechanism of the African Development Bank, which is trying to do that. We're trying to pay project developers for delivering adaptation benefits that may be economically attractive projects, financially attractive, which would then enable the private sector to borrow the debt that they need to build the project. And I think that can apply to the clean air issue. We're also working to develop green banks, national financial institutions who would be able to lend to cities that otherwise don't have the access to funds. Now, if I come to my question, the carbon markets, it's very easy to see a link between clean air and emission reductions, but from the adaptation side, how do you link clean air to adaptation? What is the climate rationale between, or the link between clean air and adaptation? Because, for example, to access funds from the GCF, you need to demonstrate that climate rationale. So how do you argue that clean air is linked to adaptation to climate change, and that it's not just development finance being rebadged as climate finance? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gareth. And I rather feel we should have had you up here, in fact, with all of the contributions you've made. But I also hope in future we'll also see AFTB is one of the top funders as the funding for African countries increases both demand and supply. Sean, do you want to take that question?
I'll take it briefly and then I'll pass it on. Good to see you here, Gareth. Great that we can engage the FDB in this conversation. So one instance of adaptation springs to mind, which is around forest fires. Avoiding forest fires is a very good way of avoiding both climate harm and significant air pollution. We're obviously seeing that it's very much in the media and the public eye so during the last year. I think that's the one that immediately springs to mind, but there need to be others that others on the panel might be able to think of.
It's a very, very simple one. Sick people are more vulnerable to climate change. Plain and simple. And so when kids grow up with asthma and all of the long-term health costs and health implications that come with it, they are less resilient. there is that link, but there's also links in these sectors. Climate smart agriculture, for example, doesn't believe that agricultural farming is a huge source for pollution. So there are ways to think about it. And we also have to remember, not all air pollution has to be about climate change. And certainly it's about thinking through where there's access to climate finance or carbon markets. But there's, Gregor said it's not about the lack of money, and it often isn't. It's about access to that money and using that money more smartly. Because again, $1.5 trillion subsidies globally that are having the externality there. You shift that around, not only do you reduce the cost because air pollution is there, you got money. So it's not always about generating new money, it's about making sure that the current money that's been spent is spent.
Thank you very much. I thank you for an extremely interesting panel. When we started, I looked at the last point we said, this room for optimism, that having listened to the conversation and the realism, especially that Valerie you brought to the conversation, which I think we should have had 10 years ago. It makes me wonder how, at a time when we are also looking at climate change as the big macro problem within which this exists, how then do we leverage that momentum to drive action on air quality, as given that we really, this is the low-hanging fruit, this is where everybody can relate to some degree to the issue. I work with Environmental Defense Fund, and one of the things we're doing is doing a lot of like city level data collection, mainly to drive more false awareness and, you know, get decision makers to really understand the what they want. And one of the things I was thinking of now listening to Sean was behind these figures, because we spent too many years focusing on quantity of finance and less so on the quality of finance. So behind the figures that you have in this report, to what extent are you also trying to track what should I say the leveraging factor has been, how much private capital gets mobilized, especially like from World Bank resources, and where this goes, because you might have a bigger impact. I think Valerie said at the beginning, with less dollars going towards policy than with a significant amount going towards technology acquisitions that related to air quality improvement.
Thank you. Thank you, Angela. Great question. And let me put that to who would like to take that up.
Thank you, Angela. I would actually say, instead of thinking about climate change, using that to leverage air pollution, we should almost look at it the other way, because climate change has become such a politicized space. Air pollution is much less. Most everybody, if you visit particular cities or particular rural areas, and you're having difficulty breathing, you get it. So in some ways, we need to talk about air pollution and interventions there that will have climate killers. We should be talking about getting rid of diesel generators, not just because it ends up phasing out fossil fuels and reducing emissions and all that good stuff, but because people are going to be able to breathe better. And it's not just about outdoor air pollution. Indoor air pollution is a key factor, particularly of women and children. And a lot of that is based on burning things like charcoal, which is a huge source of deforestation, for example, which has a huge climate. And so in some ways, we almost need to reverse it and think about how we use air pollution to leverage climate action at a time when climate action becomes so politicized. But either way, we do need more action, and we're seeing it in our workplace. I think the awareness is increasingly there, including in Africa. It's about figuring out, are the solutions available, whether it's a technological solution, whether it's a policy solution, and are they affordable? Because we can't pretend in today's world that we're doing this.
And yeah, it's funny I've asked you in terms of tracking, right? Yeah, no, I think there is a real need to track the levels of finance and the quantity. I mean, in a sense, your report was about the quantity of finance, right? Also the quality of finance and the qualitative things that are being done. And I really think that our website, which is in the chat, the online participants, but it's the ETG Public Bank Finance Tracking Matrix, could really help track across all the different DB strategies, policies, country strategies, technical assistance, what is going on here, to, you know, align with the quality goals across the system. And I think it's a brilliant event actually, because I think we're all sitting here coming up with loads of new ideas of what could be done. You know, that idea I just mentioned, the idea of air quality alignment. I love Gareth's idea that the adaptation benefits mechanism could also be reimagined as an air quality benefits mechanism that could be monetized. And I'm thinking about the Just Energy Transition partnerships that have been signed in South Africa, Indonesia, Egypt and Senegal. Could we imagine, just as you're right, air quality is not politically controversial. Could we imagine a just air quality transition partnerships where some of that grant money is used to help those taxi drivers make that transition, help the farmers make that transition, help the coal miners make that transition, and thinking about the social aspect of air quality policy and not just the sort of what comes out of the table.
I would just add that I like the idea that this isn't just all in the context of climate change. There are other huge things happening and changing in the world. You know, pre-COVID, the world operated, the global trade system operated on a global just-in-time supply chain basis. And that was proven to break down. One ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal showed that didn't work. We're going through this massive industrial international change that everybody reconfigured the supply chain. And so for those countries, for those companies, would be in India, Vietnam, Malaysia, wherever, that would be competing solely on price to meet that global just-in-time basis for supply. And thinking of other factors, how they can show that they can be competitive and worthy of investment dollars in a very new paradigm. Not very.
Thank you very much. That big picture and also as well as the very specific picture on tracking as well. We have two online questions. One actually went to the point that was just raised in terms of, isn't it in some ways easier to make the case for air pollution funding, air quality funding, rather than climate, especially in countries that are still at the development stage? You know, a transport project is an air quality project, well, especially if it's a rail project, for example, electric vehicles and so on. So perhaps there's something about, I think Valerie, you talked about awareness, Greg, you also did, of what these things are. There's that awareness of what kinds of projects, and just do you, again, perhaps kind of thinking about the future, is that something that can be, there's a stronger process of campaigning to do perhaps around that? The second question is, how can different actors facilitate the process of increasing funding for air quality? So what are the actions for different stakeholders to take? And I just, again, beyond the specific solutions, what role for civil society, what role for donors and multilaterals? So again, so if you could speak to those two, maybe Sean first of all.
So the actions for different stakeholders. I think one of the things that I'm hoping we get out of this meeting is that there is an ecosystem of actors around air quality and we're very much around building a movement around clean air. And in that ecosystem, in that movement, obviously, you know, civil society might take the lead, but we do believe there's an ecosystem of actors that need to recognize their roles. We think there's more work to be done on crowding the private sector in to innovate around air quality monitoring, for instance. We do think there's much more to be done around exchanging best practice and helping cities and countries learn from each other. We do think there's a role for the NDBs to, as we said before, to encourage each other and learn from each other. And you know, but I do think there's enough that hasn't been cracked, which is this conundrum around availability and affordability. That somehow or other we're not going to make substantive progress on this dreadful issue unless we can find a way through that narrow gap. And to your point earlier on, Valerie, it's hard, but it can be done. It has been done. Cities and countries have done it. It's about prioritization. I think, come back to the other question, if you see things less as a cost and more as a benefit, and we start to talk in those terms, I think you can actually build a more productive and positive narrative around these actions. Because nobody likes to feel a cost imposed upon themselves, or to, and imposing costs is not politically popular. But demonstrating benefits, talking about benefits, delivering benefits is something that politicians like, citizens love, and even vested interest groups can be brought around to understand. So I think, you know, in terms of the actions for the likes of Clean Air Fund, we want to help make that asset-based value increasing type argument around air quality. I think, you know, too long as we're saying, all been about cost. Let's try to find a way to talk about benefits and build momentum around that.
I couldn't agree more that we have to move from a problem statement to a set of solutions, what the negative options are. And one way I think we need to do this is move from this ecosystem of actors to a coalition of people working on this issue of air pollution in particular. And all of the various financiers who are both on the public side, whether it's international public, or local, domestic public resources, and on the private side, to sit together and figure out, of the available and affordable solutions, who's going to finance what? How do we use international public financing to make it more attractive for the private sector, where you are appealing to their bottom line, which is making money? How do we make sure that they can make more money by doing this? They can, by simply doing what they can do, which is T-bill and chill, given interest rates that have been raised so much in places like the US. You can make a lot of money by simply putting your money in a US Treasury bill and doing nothing else. Why take the risk of trying to invest in air quality somewhere? So I think we need a coalition of financiers. We're not just willing, but we're working on this issue. And then figure out what's the supply chain of finance, who can pick up what part of the bill, so that not only do you end up with a project again, but you end up fundamentally changing how that city or how that rural area works, so that you reduce pollution from the start.
I don't advocate T-bill and shell, but I recognize that. But in the private sector, if you're in a financial intermediary such as that, well, it's about demonstrating how we can achieve a superior risk-adjusted return over T-bill, right? And the point that somebody made before, this is hopefully a future where we don't need a taxonomy, we don't need sustainable employment, we don't need green bonds, we don't need ESG, that it can all be done conventionally. And we're starting to get there. Somebody talked about transportation. You are not going to get a transportation project financed by anybody if it doesn't somehow address air quality and the other sustainable factors around transportation. Here, those days are done.
And this is a global health emergency. This is a health issue, and therefore the medical sector, the public health sector can help us. I remember I bumped into a pediatrician at COP26 Glasgow, and she was just absolutely enlightening to think about the pediatric medical implications of climate change. I was one of those mad people who took a 6-month-old baby to a COP for 2 weeks. Don't do it. But we got into this whole conversation, and you know, they are such an important stakeholder in the web of stakeholders that are going to help solve and raise awareness on this problem, bring them into the conversation as well.
Thank you. A great set of solutions there. And we have one final audience question.
Thank you so much. I also think this has been a brilliant conversation. So thank you to all the panelists. So my question is about now that air quality is part of the mission at the World Bank, how will that feed in and how does that work? Will that look differently? Do you anticipate a leadership role for the World Bank, be that this strategy or anything?
Thank you. The short answer is yes. I mean, we're under pressure, the Department President out of the is asking me and asking me, all of my team, what are we doing, what are we doing more? And the question becomes really around what has stopped us from doing in the past? How do we learn a message from what we're doing in Cairo, what we've done in Nairobi or in Johannesburg or Lagos, what we've done in Beijing in terms of actually making it work. So how do we do more of it? How do we productize an air quality investment so we can move money into the sector at speed and at scale? And that means we're going to have a lot more senior management attention. We're going to prioritize this, though it's a term that's very difficult because, you know, in a world where 258 million people in 58 countries are starving to death, priorities are something that are very difficult to meet. There's lots of things that need to happen. The kids today in Delhi who are born with smoker's lung, children born out of the womb with smoker's lung, because their mothers have been breathing such dirty air. Of course, that's to be a priority. But so too are the people starving. So too are the people who lose all of their assets or their lives to flooding or to drought. So this is something we're committed to find a solution to scale up the solutions that work, to figuring out what's the financing package that we can put together to help countries in Europe become better, to attract private sector, because the risk-adjusted returns will be fixed. So look to us, because I hope that we meet again at our annual meeting in Europe. Not only will we have moved up the rank, because I think, but we will have moved investment into places, whether it's across Africa or Latin America, in South Asia or East Asia, where we will actually see results. We will actually see benefit into that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And great to hear about that expected leadership role. And really, I think a really great note to pass on to Sean, who's going to really just conclude for us. Really great to talk about so many different solutions. And it's clear that there is a case for doing more. And this conversation, yeah, every single conversation I've been working with Clean Air Fund in Nairobi, online, and also here, it's always been really enlightening and again very solutions and option focused. So Sean, what are you going to take from this and what do you think we could do going forwards?
Thanks very much. You know, I think it's been a very rich conversation, so thank you very much. So it's hard to summarize it and tie it all neatly in a bow. It's great to hear that the new World Bank president has got his eye on this issue and is engaged on it and is kind of wanted to hear how you can build a stronger solution and scale that. And we hear you very much around it's a priority, it will be an increased priority, but relatively speaking. You know, I think, you know, it's a difficult world we live in, and yes, and it would be unconscionable for you to be abandoning your mission of ending poverty in order for people to breathe clean air. But you know, we know these issues are inextricably linked as well. So we can so if you can clean up the air, people will live healthier, happier, more productive lives. And I think that's absolutely vital. A couple of other things that I heard that I wanted just to reflect on. One, which is not something you hear very often, which is that it's not about the lack of money. The money is there. What I'm taking away from that is what we lack so far is imagination and application to find ways to channel that money and find ways to put it to work in the right place, get the right results. So I think that's a very, very critical one. I think for the Clean Air Fund, I've spoken a little bit about kind of us being part of a movement. We talked a bit about an ecosystem of actors. Valerie talked about a coalition of workers. We'd love to hear more about what that looks like, who could be part of it, how can we help, if there's anything in civil society, that philanthropy we can do to stimulate that. We'd be very pleased to do it. Final thing, we will continue this work of tracking financing, continuing to be part of that conversation, seeing if there is progress. It's vital, I think it's essential. We think it can be done in a very constructive and positive way. So I wanted to thank all the panel for the way you've engaged, around this challenge of dealing with air pollution, the ideas you brought to the table, solutions you've imagined, and constructive conversation. So thank you very much. And thank you all, the audience, for your time and your attention on this issue. And we will be staying in touch with you. There's a lot more work to be done on this topic, and we will be. Thank you in the room. Thank you, Helen, for your moderation, and thank you everyone, and for the rest of you. And read the report. Thank you very much.